Hey everyone, Luis Menchaca from Level 1 Gaming here with another review. Up for judgment today is Aquanox Deep Descent, which is a reimagining/reboot of a game franchise that started in 1996. The series has remained a PC exclusive franchise thus far, and with this latest entry, continues on with the tradition. The game was successfully crowdfunded via Kickstarter, and developers Digital Arrow even threw in some nods to the other games in the franchise without alienating newcomers. So here's my review of Aquanox Deep Descent, published by THQ Nordic. The story has you playing as a crew of 4 people, piloting a submarine after waking up from cryostasis in the far future. The characters don't have memories of their past lives before the apocalypse. This is a perfect vehicle for the player to experience the world through their eyes, and the player can acclimate to their surroundings just as the characters do the same. The world was flooded, and humans have been living their lives in submarines and underwater facilities that were constructed. The remaining people have clustered together under various factions that are at war with each other over control/resources. The story revolves around the 4 characters trying to remember their past, as it might be the key to figuring out what caused the apocalypse and possibly saving the world. The crew meets various people along their journeys, doing favors for every faction they meet along the way. Even some NPCs that you meet are credited to Kickstarter backers, with the in-game text stating that the characters were named by the backers. The story isn't really anything special, as a lot of the character development is done by in-game text, stating that a character was an ex-mercenary or a defector, etc. Also, the developers rely on stereotypes/cliches to message to the player the hard lives people have lived through. Even the crew the players plays as are 2-dimensional archetypes, from the scientist, the assassin, the former pirate, and the veteran. And that's all you need to know as far as character development goes. The game's story is a bit uninspired because I was able to call the ending and all the reveals well in advance, including a Star Wars-like moment that I predicted would happen. And I'm not that good at doing that, so it should be telling that I was able to see where the story was headed. Although, because I'm not familiar with the past entries in the franchise, there is an extra cutscene at the end of the game that centers around the protagonist of the first 2 games in the series, and then even name drops the protagonist of the 3rd game. Also, there is a side mission where the players rescues the protagonist of the first 2 games, but the character is still a young boy, so that is a nice nod, making this a prequel of sorts. If there is one word to describe this section, it's repetitive. The gameplay loop does nothing new after the first 30 minutes of the game, and it took me about 14 hours to beat the game, so it was definitely monotonous. The game's campaign has you doing the same 3 missions over and over again, from following the ship, destroy the enemies, protect the NPCs. There is no mission variety, which could be a limitation of the genre since the game is a submarine simulation game of sorts, so underwater dogfights make up the bulk of the game. The game is straightforward, as early on the NPCs tell you about the in-game economy and tells you how to buy upgrades. As the player, you need to constantly look for scraps at the bottom of the sea. Luckily, there is an in-game radar that tells you where the scraps are, and it's a bit frustrating to have the players scan the wreckage before collecting the loot. The loot and currency that you gather can be used once you dock at a station, and you can use resources to craft ammunition and/or buy weapons and upgrades to your ship, and you get access to more than one ship, but you can only pilot one at a time. Each ship has its own strengths and weaknesses. You can pick a ship with a lot of shield and health to be a tank and not die as easily, but in exchange, you lose out on speed and maneuverability. Or you can pick up a small, fast ship, but you lose out on health and shield. There are a total of 6 ships that run the gamut of specializations, and I tended to stick with the bulky ship to allow me to live longer. There are 2 shoutouts that I want to give in this section. The first is the UI. The player plays in a cockpit view, and the game's UI is built into the ship's design, so that was well done, and it looks natural to the gameplay. The second is one story mission where the player races against an NPC. It's the only mission of its type and was definitely a much needed break from the same missions. It's too bad that it occurred over halfway into the game. The game has multiplayer, but I was unable to experience any of it during the review period. I was playing the game after the game had launched, and I found 0 lobbies of deathmatch available to play. So I just imagined that the game has the player choose a faction and then fight PvP. The other online multiplayer option is online co-op. The game allows for up to 4 drop-in, drop-out multiplayer where the single-player campaign can be tackled together with friends. I did manage to find 2 lobbies of people playing that way, but both lobbies were private lobbies that were password protected, so I wasn't able to enter someone else's session to test things out. Ultimately, this game might not be popular enough to have a robust online multiplayer scene. The shining beacon in this game was its art direction. The graphics were top-notch, and I experienced no glitches throughout my playtime. It appears the most amount of this game's budget went towards making the game look pretty, and it shows. Although the game doesn't have any CGI cutscenes or 3D character models, instead it employs storyboard animatics, the kind that you see in making-of documentaries of movies on Blu-ray extras. It feels like a shortcut, but it was serviceable.
Were they always going to ambush me? Or did I lose my only chance of going home just because I was afraid, just because I didn't trust them?
It doesn't matter. The Tupilok is your home now.
I need some time to think, but I want you to have something, a reward for helping me, even if things went wrong.
The audio was nothing special. I'm already starting to forget the game's music even as I record this. The game does feature voice acting, but only for principal characters. Most NPCs have one grunt of dialogue before going full text-based interaction. The voice actors really try to put emotion behind the dialogue, and I'm happy that they tried, but the game's way of telling the story doesn't help it. Side note, there were 2 times by my count where the voice actor's script was off by a word from the in-game text, which is more of a nitpick than actual criticism. The last thing I want to say on this subject is that the combat music is always the same, which has a bit of an EDM vibe to it, which doesn't make sense when the combat encounter has the player fighting sharks. I don't ever see a world where the score of a Jaws movie goes with this.
Pressure jumps depleted.
Overall, the game didn't offend me. The game was boring throughout, and the trite story didn't make up for its shortcomings. The gameplay was repetitive, and with very few exceptions, didn't really show anything new after the first 30 minutes of gameplay. The game, while pretty to look at, had taken a step back in the cutscenes department, opting for an old-school approach of RPG dialogue boxes that don't fit the modern look the game was going for. I would classify this game as a mediocre game, so I give it a 5 out of 10. The game is out right now on PC, on Steam, GOG, and Epic Game Store for $29.99. The review code was provided by the publisher THQ Nordic and developer Digital Arrow for the purposes of the review. This game was reviewed on PC via Steam. For more PC games, check out our review for BPM Bullets Per Minute, and be sure to check out level1gaming.com for more games coverage. I'm your reviewer, Luis Menchaca, and if you want to see all the work I do, you can find me on Twitter at Chakalaka88. Until next time, peace.